Chapter 1. The Line That Never Breaks. They stood like stone against a rising tide of ruin, silent, immovable, a wall carved from discipline rather than flesh. No banners stirred above them. No victory cries cut the air. Only the cold breath of a world on the edge of death, and the stillness of warriors who had already accepted the cost. They don't shout. They don't boast. They simply hold the line. The Novamarines move the way glaciers move, slow, inevitable, crushing everything that dares press against them. In their presence, war feels smaller, less dramatic, stripped of the frantic violence that defines so many of the Emperor's chosen. Where others carve glory, they carve certainty. Where others roar oaths, they whisper nothing at all. To watch a Novamarine stand in battle is to witness the Codex Astartes in its purest, harshest form. No flourish, no improvisation, only the cold geometry of survival. Discipline as armor, discipline as weapon, discipline as identity. They are the Emperor's northern shield, the unwavering wall that guards the distant frontiers where Ultramar fades into the raw dark. In the outer regions, where traitors test boundaries and Xeno's armies swarm from the cold void, it is the Novamarines who anchor the Imperium's reach, who ensure that the North does not fall into the same chaos that shattered so many sectors after the Age of Heresy. Their silence is not emptiness. It is focus, pressure, inevitability. These warriors live by a law older than their chapter, older even than Guilliman's reforms. The law that the line must hold, no matter the cost, no matter the foe, no matter the silence that follows. Among them, a relic moves like a shadow of memory, the laurel of defiance, a simple crown of ironwork, battered and darkened by age, yet revered as if it carries the weight of 1,000 battlefields. It does. It carries a vow born in blood and discipline, a promise that the line will never, ever break again. Its presence shapes them. Its history drives them. Its meaning binds them. They stand not for glory, but for necessity. They fight not to conquer, but to endure. In the Empire's endless northern wars, when hope dies first and light dies second, the Novamarines remain. It leads to the question that haunts their legend. What turns a chapter into a doctrine? How does an army become more than its flesh, becoming instead a living scripture, a perfect expression of order in a galaxy drowning in chaos? The answer lies in their beginning, in fire, in betrayal, in the ashes of a time when trust itself was broken. But that is the next chapter. For now, the image remains, a line of blue and bone-white armor, unshaken beneath a storm of shellfire, helmets fixed forward, bolters locked, hearts unbroken. The world screams around them, but they do not bend. They do not shift. They do not fall. They are the line that never breaks. And when the guns fall silent, the silence is not peace. It is simply the space they leave behind, waiting for the next war to test them. Chapter 2. Born from the ashes of heresy. Fires still clung to the edges of the Imperium. Not the bright fire of revolt, but the slow, suffocating burn left behind when trust collapses. The warp storms receded. The traitor fleets died, but the wounds did not close. They festered in the quiet places, fortresses without commanders, worlds without faith, soldiers without certainty. From that smoldering quiet, a truth hardened. The Imperium had survived once. It would not survive again by chance. And so the rebuilding began. Not with banners, not with triumph, but with the cold arithmetic of necessity. Guilliman moved through the ruins like a surgeon through the aftermath of a massacre. The legions had failed. Their very scale had betrayed them. Their pride had allowed rot to bloom unseen. The cure was not forgiveness. It was division. The legions were broken into chapters, small, controlled, accountable. Not armies carved from myth, but instruments crafted with intent. No more sweeping authority. No more commanders whose legends could suffocate reason. No more empires within empires. From this deliberate fracture came one fragment that refused to be just a fragment. A shard with purpose sharper than its origins. A force shaped not for conquest, but for stability. They would be the Novamarines, born in silence, forged in caution, created not to inspire fear, but to prevent catastrophe. While other new chapters embraced identity through culture, homeworld, or inherited glory, the Novamarines inherited something colder: responsibility. The Imperium's northern frontier was vast and imperfect, an expanse of vulnerable routes, half-lit systems, and scars left by wars no scribe had ever fully recorded. It needed guardians who would not drift, warriors who would not interpret loyalty as privilege, soldiers who would not mistake heroism for authority. They were placed there because the North was a void where old ambitions could rise again, and the Imperium would not survive another war master. The man shaping this newborn chapter understood that with brutal clarity. Lucretius Corvo, a commander carved not from charisma, but from precision. He was the kind of leader whose presence quieted a room before he spoke, not from intimidation, but inevitability. His authority was not loud. It was exact. Corvo treated doctrine as if it were breath, structure as if it were flesh, discipline as if it were salvation. He did not fashion the Novamarines into heroes. He fashioned them into a system. Where others taught strategy, Corvo taught continuity. Where others invoked ideals, he invoked process. Where others molded warriors, he molded replacements. He believed the galaxy bled because armies depended too deeply on singular legends, because the legions trusted their champions more than their doctrines, because loyalty had become personal, and personal loyalty was a crack waiting for a traitor's hand. So Corvo built a chapter that could not fracture under charisma, ego, or ambition. Every officer was replaceable. Every squad was interchangeable. Every formation functioned without the man at its center. It was not coldness. It was survival. For the Novamarines, the Codex Astartes was not a guide. It was identity. It was law. It was the bones beneath every action, every maneuver, every breath drawn in armor. Their inheritance from the Ultramarines was not glory. It was structure without deviation. That structure hardened fast. It became instinct. It became armor stronger than ceramite. While other chapters sought legacy, the Novamarines sought precision. They stripped ceremony to its core. Clothing, armor, heraldry. Everything was minimal, almost austere, as if decoration were a gateway to distraction. Their training floors were quiet. No chants, no boasts, only breath, rhythm, and the endless repetition of Codex perfect engagement. Warriors forged under Corvo did not learn to think like individuals. They learned to think like formations. The galaxy around them was still fractured, rebellions sparking like embers inside the ruins of former Legion-held domains. Rogue governors claimed authority they did not possess. Entire sectors drifted quietly toward independence. The Imperium could not police everything. It could barely hold itself together. But the Novamarines? They were built to stabilize, not conquer. Their deployment patterns reflected it from the beginning. They did not arrive as shock troops. They arrived as anchors. Where a world teetered, they brought order. Where a sector bled, they brought cohesion. Where commanders hesitated, they brought doctrine that did not bend. It was said, quietly, cautiously, that Corvo could walk into a war zone, see the battles flow once, and immediately carve a perfect Codex strategy from the chaos. His clarity was not intuition. It was discipline refined until it resembled prophecy. To serve under him was not to follow a leader. It was to inhabit a pattern. But even this was not the heart of what made the Novamarines unique. It was not their founding. It was not their structure. It was not the Codex. It was fear, not of the enemy, but of becoming the enemy. The heresy had left a shadow that never receded. Corvo felt it in every decision, every battle plan, every correction delivered to a captain whose judgment began to drift from doctrine. His chapter would not improvise itself into greatness. It would not trust instinct over order. It would not tolerate glory-seeking. It would not mistake autonomy for freedom. The Novamarines were forged to be the Imperium's shield against its own past. The shield on the northern frontier. The shield that neither faltered nor reshaped itself. The shield that could not be corrupted by ambition. And in this purpose, they found purity. They advanced like geometry incarnate. They fought like inevitability. They held position with a patience that unnerved even their allies. When others became symbols, they remained structure. When others sought legacy, they pursued clarity. When others drifted into ritual, they sank deeper into the Codex's marrow. Their silence became their doctrine. Their discipline became their soul. Their restraint became their legend. And beneath it all lay the simple truth Corvo had carved into them. The Imperium survives not by heroes. It survives by lines that do not break. In a galaxy of fire and betrayal, they were born not to rise above the ruins, but to ensure they never returned. Chapter 3. The Laurel of Defiance. Storm clouds churned above Astagar like a wounded leviathan, bleeding lightning across a sky already burning. The ground shook, not with fear, but with the slow, deliberate advance of something vast and blasphemous. A titan of the word-bearers strode across the horizon, its corrupted plating crawling with scripture carved in blood. Each footfall cracked the earth. Each cannon thrum tore a piece from the world's spine. And against that apocalypse, a single formation of blue and bone-white armor stood unmoving. Novamarines, not shouting, not praying, not retreating, just holding, quiet as a verdict. The planet around them had already folded. Imperial Guard regiments shattered. PDF battalions burned. Entire defense lines collapsed into mud and screams. The word-bearers surged forward in a tide of red armor and warped chanting, confident that nothing human could withstand them. But the Novamarines were not questioned. They were an answer. Their captain, Lucretius Corvo, watched the coming titan without blinking. There was no rage in him, no glory, no despair, only calculation, the kind that feels like a blade placed gently against the throat of fate. Astagar had hours left, maybe less, but Corvo did not speak of survival. He spoke of position. He raised one hand, 2 fingers extended, nothing more. To any other chapter, such a gesture would be lost in the chaos. To the Novamarines, it was absolute. Squads shifted half a step. Fire lanes tightened. Angles sharpened. Discipline formed a geometry the enemy could not yet see. The word-bearers saw only a thin line, a last stand, a doomed formation waiting to die. They did not understand the truth until the first volley. The air ignited in a lattice of bolter fire, controlled, synchronized, mercilessly timed. No wasted rounds, no wasted breath. Each Novamarine became a metronome of death, marking time with disciplined precision. The traitors surged forward in a wave of zealotry, roaring their profane scripture, and were met with silence. Perfect, unbroken, suffocating. The front ranks of word-bearers staggered, armor shattered in exact intervals, as if some invisible architect had carved their demise well before the battle began. Corvo shifted again, 3 fingers now. The line compressed. The firing rhythm evolved. The precision intensified. The Titan, enraged by this defiance, turned its cannons toward the Novamarines' position. The earth split. A blast tore a crater into existence, vaporizing rock, soil, and the screaming remnants of traitor infantry. The shockwave ripped across the battlefield, shredding air and armor alike. Yet the Novamarines remained, bent by the blast but unbroken, driven into the dirt but unyielding. They rose as one, like a machine resetting itself. Stormfire resumed. The Titan stepped closer, casting a shadow long enough to swallow an entire company. Its corrupted reactor howled. Warp energy bled from its leg joints like the drool of a diseased beast. At its feet, the word-bearers surged with renewed fury. Astigar would be trampled, wiped, made a shrine of ruin, unless the line held. Corvo did not wait for the Titan to speak its blasphemies. He turned his helm toward his warriors, not to inspire them, but to confirm the inevitable. A nod. It was enough. The Novamarines moved, not backward, forward, into the teeth of the storm. They advanced like a glacier, slow, unforgiving, crushing all resistance beneath its cold weight. Their boots carved order into chaos. Their formation locked into the perfect diamond of the Codex Astartes' most dangerous maneuver. A disciplined spearhead meant to pierce impossibility itself. The traitors broke against it like surf against stone. Chain words screamed. Warp flames roared. The word-bearers chanted the names of dead gods. But the Novamarines answered with nothing. Their silence was a rebuke sharper than any blade. Corvo reached the first rank of traitors. His blade rose, a clean, perfect arc, and fell with the precision of judgment. He carved a path not through bodies, but through formation errors, the weak angle, the exposed flank, the overextended zealot. He fought like a correction more than a warrior. Behind him, the line compressed and expanded on instinct, swallowing traitors with machine-like hunger. Their discipline became a predator, invisible yet inevitable. The Titan roared, its arm weapons charged, preparing to erase the spearhead entirely. Corvo signaled again. 4 fingers. The line dissolved. It did not break. It split. 2 flanking forces moved with impossible speed, drilling into the Titan's blind angles. Devastators unleashed hell, volleys of loss, plasma, and missile fire targeting the joints, cabling, and heretical glyph clusters etched into the war engine's corrupted heart. Every shot found its mark, not by luck, by design. The Titan staggered, one knee buckling for the first time since its corruption. The ground shuddered beneath the collapse. Its left arm swung wildly, scorching the battlefield with a blast wide enough to obliterate anything lacking perfect positioning. Nothing in Corvo's formation stood there, not by chance, by forethought. The word-bearers began to panic. The Titan's fall became prophecy. Their certainty cracked, and in that fracture, discipline triumphed. Corvo reached the Titan's foot, its plates steaming with warp-tainted heat. He signaled once more, palm down, sweeping. The Devastators switched targets. Fire concentrated on the knee actuator, hammering the joint until the internal structure glowed white and then ruptured. The Titan fell. Its scream was a choir of machinery and demon rage collapsing into ruin. The ground trembled. The sky shook. Astigar inhaled. The Novamarines did not cheer. There was no triumph, only adjustment. They moved immediately, smoothly, into kill pattern closure. Traitor survivors were cut down with clinical precision. No waste, no excess, no noise. When the battlefield finally fell still, Corvo walked toward the Titan's smoldering remains. Among the wreckage, a twisted iron circlet lay half-buried, part of the Titan's profane interior shrine, a mockery of Imperial laurels. He lifted it from the ash, blackened, warped, a symbol of defiance made from the bones of a god machine. Corvo did not see corruption. He saw meaning, a symbol reborn from resistance, a vow forged in the shadow of annihilation, a reminder that discipline had defeated zealotry again. He raised the twisted laurel. The Novamarines understood. There was no speech, no proclamation, only the vow that would define them. We do not break. We do not bend. We endure. The laurel was reforged in the days that followed, purged, sanctified, reshaped into the relic now carried by the chapter's greatest champions. The the laurel of defiance. Not a trophy, a warning, a reminder that when the world collapses, when traitors chant their prophecies, when titans stride the battlefield with the arrogance of false gods, a line will stand, silent, unmoving, unbreakable, and when the noise ends, the silence that remains belongs to the Novamarines. Chapter 4. Honorum, the world that hardens the heart. Frost clung to the bones of Honorum like a memory that refused to melt. A world carved from silence, ringed by storms, sealed beneath skies the color of old wounds. Nothing on its surface moved without purpose. Nothing survived without discipline. It was a planet shaped by austerity, sculpted by restraint, a mirror of the warriors who would one day call it home. The wind here does not howl. It whispers, a thin, cutting sound like breath pressed through broken teeth. This world does not teach strength. It teaches control. Ice sheets grind across its continents, slow as thought, grinding stone into dust with the patience of centuries. Mountain ranges rise in jagged formations, serrated like the edges of broken weapons. Between them lie plains of frozen ash, remnants of volcanic eras long dead, still warm beneath the surface, as if the world remembers fire but refuses to show it. Honorum does not roar its challenges. It waits, it watches, it measures, and anything that breaks its silence is judged. The Novamarines chose this world because it resembled their truth, a place where endurance is the only language that matters, and failure leaves no echo. Honorum hardens the heart not with brutality, but with stillness, with repetition, with inevitability. Here, warriors are not forged in heat. They are carved from frost. The trials begin long before recruits lift a weapon. They begin the moment a youth steps into Honorum's polar flats, the place where even breath is rationed by the cold. The snow is thin here, a crust over jagged rock that shatters beneath each footfall. The sky is a pale, pitiless dome. There is no shelter, no shadow, no distraction. Recruits are not asked to climb mountains. They are asked to endure emptiness, to walk into the open, to face the world without cover, to listen to their own thoughts until the silence becomes heavier than the air. It is not strength the Novamarines seek. Strength can be reckless. Strength can be prideful. Strength can fracture. They seek discipline that borders on resignation, the kind that does not falter under isolation, the kind that does not drift when horizons vanish, the kind that holds the line even when the line feels meaningless. Honorum teaches this without mercy. Storms come without warning. Curtains of ice that slice vision down to nothing. Wind that strips warmth from flesh in minutes. There is no shelter to reach. No haven. Only forward. Only endurance. Only the cold intimacy of survival measured in breaths. Some break. Some vanish. Some kneel on the ice and accept stillness as their final companion. Those who return do not speak. Their eyes hold the emptiness they crossed. Their silence becomes their first armor. The surface is only the beginning. Deeper within Honorum lie caverns carved by tectonic centuries, narrow lungs where heat gathers and stone sweats. These depths form the second trial, not of cold, of confinement. Recruits descend into darkness alone. No light, no guide. The tunnels twist like scars, folding back upon themselves, whispering echoes that belong to no living thing. The stone presses in. The air grows thin. Every step becomes an act of will. It is a descent into the self, into the fractures, into the doubts, into the thoughts that breed collapse and battle. Honorum strips the mind bare. It leaves recruits face to face with their discipline or their lack of it. Some emerge trembling, as if the darkness peeled layers from their soul. Some emerge calm, hollowed clean. Some do not emerge at all. The Novamarines record none of it. The world itself is the judge. The chapter is merely the witness. Those who survive the frost and the deep are taken to Fortress Gnome, a sanctum carved into a cliff face like a wound forced into stone. No spires, no banners, no triumphant architecture. Gnome is not built to inspire awe. It is built to quiet the heart. Its halls are narrow, its chambers plain. Its walls carry no murals of victory, only etched scripts of duty, precise lines, exact angles, as if the fortress itself breathes geometry. Recruits walk these halls in silence, not by command, by expectation. Here, voices sound wrong. Even whispers feel like disruption. The fortress is an echo chamber for discipline, magnifying every lapse, every irregular breath, every flicker of distraction. Meditation is not a ritual. It is a necessity. Recruits sit for hours beneath glow lamps, their armor half-formed and cold, feeling its weight on their shoulders. They memorize tactical doctrines until the symbols cease to be text and become instinct. They trace battle patterns in the air with gloved fingers, repeating them until their movements resemble the sweep of machines. Every motion is pared down. Every thought is refined. Every heartbeat aligns with the chapter's rhythm. This is where the quiet is learned. Not silence, quiet. Silence can be empty. Quiet has purpose. Quiet is control. Quiet is precision. Quiet is the distance between panic and obedience. The Novamarines carry this quiet into every war. There is a ritual here, one not spoken of outside the chapter. The etching, the marking, the transformation of memory into flesh. When a recruit earns the right to ascend, they kneel in a chamber lit by a single lumen. There are no chants, no oaths, only the sound of a needle slicing skin with calm regularity. Tattoos are carved into their arms, their chests, their backs, not symbols of glory, but records, coordinates of their first survival, marks of their failures, patterns representing the formations they will someday command. Each line is a reminder. Each mark is a memory. Each stroke is a burden. The ink is cold. The needle is steady. The flesh accepts the lesson. The tattoos are not decoration. They are scripture, written not for others to read, but for the warrior to carry. A Novamarine skin becomes a chronicle of discipline, a map of decisions, a ledger of alignment. The marks grow with them, with each campaign, with each duty fulfilled. Over time, a veteran's body resembles a codex writ in flesh. Honorum shapes them into creatures of calm inevitability. The world teaches patience that does not crack, restraint that does not waver, purpose that does not drift. Its ecosystems mirror the chapter's doctrine. Predators do not rush. They stalk. They wait. They endure hunger without movement. Storms do not rage. They build. They thicken. They fall with the weight of inevitability. Even the oceans here are slow, covered by shifting sheets of ice, their currents grinding beneath the surface, silent as drifting ghosts. Everything on Onorum speaks in the same tongue. Hold, endure, persist. This is why the Novamarines seldom shout in battle, why they do not rush, why they advance like frost reclaiming a landscape, quiet, steady, impossible to stop. The world carved the habit into their bones. Even in war, they move with Onorum's rhythm. Slow, deliberate, precise. They do not waste ammunition. They do not break formation. They do not indulge in fury. Others mistake it for emotionlessness. They are wrong. It is discipline weaponized. When a Novamarine returns to Onorum, blooded, tested, whether by distant wars, they do not come for rest. They come for alignment, to walk again upon the ice, to descend once more into the quiet chambers, to feel the needle renew the script upon their skin. They return to remember the stillness that shaped them, the silence that sharpened them, the world that hardened their hearts. Onorum is not a home. It is a threshold, a crucible that never cools. Every Novamarine carries a piece of it into the stars. The frost behind the voice, The patience beneath the strike, the unyielding geometry of their discipline. Honor breathes through them, cold, measured, eternal. And in the final moments of every battle, when fire burns low, when enemies crumble, when the guns fall silent, the last thing that remains is the same thing that rules Onorum. Silence. Heavy, waiting, inevitable. A silence carved not by retreat, but by endurance. Chapter 5. The Art of Inevitable War. War begins long before the first shot is fired, long before steel meets flesh, long before the enemy sees the shape of its own ending. War begins in stillness, in the breath drawn, in the line formed, in the inevitability that gathers like frost before dawn. The Novamarines understand this better than any chapter alive. Where others rush to meet the enemy, they settle into geometry. Where others roar, they listen. Where others chase momentum, they build inevitability. Their doctrine is not aggression. It is not defense. It is inevitable war, a methodical drowning of the battlefield beneath discipline. They do not strike first. They do not strike fastest. They strike with the certainty of a glacier descending a valley, slow, precise, crushing everything caught beneath its path. The enemy feels them before they see them, not through fear, but through the pressure of order moving into chaos. A pressure that grows, a pressure that tightens, a pressure that does not release. That pressure is the Novamarines' true weapon. To watch them deploy is to witness inevitability take shape. The line descends from orbit in perfect intervals, dropships falling not as individual craft, but as a pattern. Vox remains cold. Engines roar only as much as needed. Hatches open with mechanical calm. When they march, it is not the thunder of Astartes' wrath. It is the sound of inevitability walking. Armor scraped clean, not polished. Helmets angled forward. Every warrior synced to the same internal cadence. A rhythm older than their founding, older than their world, older than the scars that shaped them. Their advance is not a charge. It is pressure embodied, a wall moving one breath at a time. There is no flourish, no battle cry, no wasted motion. Each bolter raised in the same second, each visor aligned along the same horizon, each step measured, identical, unbroken. It is the kind of discipline that emerges only in forces that have forgotten how to panic. Their war begins with quiet, not peace, quiet, a tightening of the air, a thinning of options, a narrowing of possibility. The enemy fires first, always. They scream their oaths. They drown the sky in tracer fire. They cast themselves forward with zeal, rage, desperation. And the Novamarines do nothing. They absorb it, accept it, let it strike their armor like weak rain tapping ancient stone. Then, without a signal, without a command shouted into the void, they adjust their formation. Half a step, no more, like a glacier adjusting the weight of 1,000 years. Bolters rise, barrels align, and the first volley falls. It is not loud, not wild, not furious. It is measured, cold, surgical. The firing pattern is identical across every warrior, a cadence born from drilled instinct and ritual repetition. No hesitation, no deviation. Every shot follows the geometry of extermination. Where Ultramarines calculate strategy, the Novamarines execute inevitability. They do not outthink the enemy. They erase the options the enemy could think with. Enemy formations break without understanding why. It is not the firepower. It is not the speed. It is not even the accuracy. It is the absence of error. Foes accustomed to exploiting weakness find nothing. No broken line. No wavering stance. No warrior overextended. No gap to slip through. The Novamarines deny chaos its oxygen. Every squad moves like an extension of a single mind. Every angle is corrected before failure can form. Every threat is neutralized before it becomes a crisis. This is why their radio discipline is absolute. No chatter, no excitement, no flare of emotion. Only the smallest commands spoken by leaders whose voices carry not urgency, but inevitability. Advance, anchor, cut, hold. Each were a blade, each were a law, each were a point pressed deeper into the enemy's fate. To fight them in close combat is worse. The Novamarines do not duel. They do not revel. They do not pursue theatrics. Their melee doctrine is an extension of their formation discipline. Slow, efficient motions designed to remove life with minimal waste. A raised blade, a twisted wrist, a thrust placed with perfect anatomical certainty. Even their strikes feel cold, as if emotion has been bled from the steel. They do not kill to destroy. They kill to maintain order. Where the blood angels dance, the space wolves howl, the black Templars burn, the Novamarines cut, quietly, precisely, without a single heartbeat wasted. Death before disorder, order before life, the line before the self. Their enemies often die without understanding what crushed them. They expect rage. They expect glory. They expect spectacle. But inevitable war offers none. It offers only the steady narrowing of space, the slow removal of options, the tightening of a perfect formation wrapping around their collapse. By the time they realize what is happening, the Novamarines have already closed the circle. No escape, no break, no mercy, just geometry, cold as the void, precise as prophecy. Other chapters admire the Novamarines, but they do not emulate them, because no one else endures war like this. No one else embraces such stillness. No one else willingly bleeds the fire from themselves until only discipline remains. Ultramarines excel in adaptable brilliance. Their genius flows like water reshaping the battlefield. But the Novamarines do not flow. They suffocate. Iron hands refine efficiency. Imperial fists hold walls with unyielding fury. Raven Guard vanish in a shadow. But the Novamarines? They advance. Always. In the same unchanging rhythm. In the same quiet inevitability. They are not built for creativity. They are built for certainty. A certainty others mistake for rigidity. Until they see how many wars collapse beneath it. Their calm is unnerving, even to allies. A battlefield drowned in explosions, smoke, and screams. And in the midst of it, a Novamarine moves as if nothing is surprising. As if war cannot break its pattern. As if death itself is simply another variable to correct. Fire washes across their shields. They adjust. Artillery falls too close. They tighten. Allies panic. They hold. Their stillness is a kind of violence, a pressure that bends everything around it. And when they speak, their voices carry the weight of finality. Reform, advance, erase. These are not commands. They are outcomes. The art of inevitable war is a doctrine built on truths most forces fear to accept. That emotion destabilizes. That fury blinds. That passion breaks formation. That glory disrupts unity. So they shed all of it, like a serpent shedding skin, like a glacier discarding the rocks it crushes beneath it. What remains is a purity few chapters can comprehend, a will so disciplined that war bends to it. They do not conquer. They do not raise. They do not overwhelm. They outlast. They outstill. They outdiscipline everything placed against them. War becomes a narrowing corridor, a funnel, a suffocation, until there is only one shape left on the field, the line that never breaks. And in its shadow, the battlefield grows quiet. That heavy, waiting quiet that follows inevitability fulfilled. The silence that lingers long after resistance has died. The silence the Novamarines carry with them, as faithfully as their bolters, as permanently as their tattoos, as eternally as their oath. Order above all, discipline above victory, the line before the world. And when the final shot is fired, when the last scream fades, when the dust settles and the stars return, Only the silence remains. Cold, endless, unbroken. Chapter 6. A chapter scattered across the stars. They move like fragments of a shattered constellation, scattered, distant, wandering through the dark with quiet purpose. Yet every piece remains part of the same design, bound by discipline instead of proximity. This is the paradox of the Novamarines, a chapter divided not by fracture, but by intention. Where others gather, they disperse. Where others seek unity, they embrace distance. Where others fortify a single bastion, they become 1,000 silent ramparts across the void. The Imperium calls them a chapter, but in truth, they are many chapters wearing one name. Each company a world unto itself, self-sustaining, self-commanding, drifting through the galaxy like isolated glaciers carved from the same ancient ice. This scattering is not accident. It is doctrine. A doctrine forged from the memory of a galaxy that once burned because armies were too concentrated, too centralized, too vulnerable to a single wound. The Novamarines refused that vulnerability. They refused that trust. So they spread into war zones where maps grow thin, into sectors swallowed by silence, into void corridors no chart remembers. Each company carries the whole chapter within it, not symbolically, literally. Every force is equipped to wage its own crusade, sustain its own logistics, conduct its own diplomacy, fight its own extinction. They do not need Macrage. They do not need Ultramar. They do not need each other, because they are each other, reflections of the same discipline cast across light years of darkness. When a Novamarine company departs, it is not with fanfare. There are no departure ceremonies, no benedictions, no banners raised in farewell. Ships drift from orbit like cold stones falling into deeper waters. Engines burn with soft, controlled pulses. Formation lights dim. Vox channels fall silent. Each company becomes a spear, launched into the unknown without expectation of return. Some vanish for decades, some for centuries. Some return with fleets of refugees trailing behind them, broken populations they have preserved through quiet intervention. Others return alone, their hulls scarred by wars so distant no record ever reached the Imperium. Still others never return at all. Their absence is not treated as tragedy, but as completion. A company lost in the void means a mission carried to its end, a purpose fulfilled, a silence earned. Their autonomy is absolute. A Novamarine captain is not a battlefield commander alone. He is a strategist, a governor, a diplomat, a judge, an executioner, a chronicler of his company's memory. He carries more authority than some planetary rulers, more responsibility than many sector lords, not because he seeks power, but because distance demands it. When a company moves beyond the frontier, into the places where the Astronomicon flickers thin, there is no guidance to lean on, no reinforcements, no counsel, no communication, only discipline, only doctrine, only the cold certainty of the Codex that holds them together even when light itself grows faint. A less structured chapter would collapse beneath such isolation. Rage would flare, instinct would twist, morale would fracture in the face of the long, unbroken dark. But the Novamarines do not fracture. Isolation strengthens them, distance sharpens them, silence aligns them. Their doctrine survives because it does not depend on the voice of a master. It depends on the geometry of war itself, a pattern that endures in every warrior, every company, every drifting shard of their scattered brotherhood. Their fleets are small, but dense with purpose. Each vessel carries forges to repair armor, vaults for relics and tattoo inks, training decks for Codex drills, archives preserved with obsessive precision, prison cells never used, because the Novamarines take no prisoners. They are designed to operate without supply lines, without external support, without expectation. A single company can wage war across an entire subsector, surviving off stripped enemy stockpiles, ravaged forges, or the remains of forgotten Imperial stations. They consume nothing lavishly. They measure. Every round, every ration, every breath. Resource discipline mirrors battlefield discipline. Nothing wasted, nothing spared, everything precise. It is why a lone company can hold a failing frontier for decades, turning their ships into floating bastions, their warriors into cold guardians of lightless borders. Where others require reinforcement, the Novamarines require only time. Time to tighten the line, time to adjust the formation, time to convert the inevitable into the executed. Many Imperial commanders misunderstand this scattering. Some fear it, some resent it, some worship it, but all agree on one truth. When a Novamarine company returns from the dark, it carries something within its silence, a gravity, a weight, a pressure shaped by battles fought without witness. Their armor bears scars not mapped in any campaign record. Their tattoos hold coordinates of worlds the Imperium forgot existed. Their eyes reflect the cold patience of warriors who have lived entire wars alone. These veterans do not speak of their crusades, not out of secrecy, out of irrelevance. The war was fought, the line was held, the silence was preserved. What more needs to be said? There's a legend whispered, not by the chapter, but by those who have encountered these isolated companies. They say that if a system lost to warp storms suddenly finds itself defended, if a station abandoned a century ago now broadcasts a single steady signal, if a world on the brink of collapse abruptly stabilizes, look into the void. You will see a lone cruiser drifting in the cold, its hull stained in blue and bone white, its lights dimmed, its Vox channels closed. A company has returned, not for praise, not for recognition, not for command, for alignment. Their long crusade ends only when their discipline requires renewal, when their tattoos demand new lines, when their silence begins to echo instead of suppress. Then they return to Honorum, to the frost, to the stillness, to the world that hardens the heart. They step onto the ice like men returning to their origin. They breathe its cold air like an old oath remembered. They feel the world's judgment settle upon them once more. They do not rest. They realign, recenter, reharden, and when the world is satisfied, when the silence within them matches the silence around them, they depart again, into the dark, into the unknown, into wars the Imperium will never hear of, into losses that will never be mourned, into victories that will never be recorded. A chapter scattered, not broken, not weakened, but multiplied across the endless night. This is their secret strength. They cannot be cornered. They cannot be crippled. They cannot be undone by a single strike. To destroy the Novamarines, you would need to extinguish 1,000 stars in 1,000 forgotten sectors. Each company would have to be erased from the dark, one by one, across the length of a galaxy that does not end. Even then, the silence would still carry their doctrine. The frost would still echo their discipline. The void would still remember their geometry. A chapter scattered across the stars, yet united by stillness. A brotherhood separated by light years, yet bound by inevitability. They are many. They are one. They are everywhere. They are nowhere. They move like fragments of order drifting through the abyss. And wherever they pass, the galaxy grows quiet. Quiet as frost. Quiet as judgment. Quiet as the moment before war becomes inevitable. Chapter 7. Brotherhood of Ultramar. Stillness settles before the memory. A quiet older than the chapter. Older than the Codex. Older than the wound that split the galaxy and bled half of humanity into ruin. In that stillness, a truth waits. The Novamarines do not worship their lineage. They remember it. Memory, to them, is not devotion. It is discipline, a spine of thought anchoring them against collapse, a line unbroken across centuries of silence. Their brotherhood with Ultramar is not a bond of blood. nor the warmth of kinship. It is the gravity of order pulling one fragment toward another, the way stars align not by choice, but by inevitability. They do not call Guilliman a father. They call him the architect, the one who carved structure from ruin, the one who understood that strength without discipline becomes corruption, the one whose shadow still falls across their every formation, cold as the void, steady as unbroken stone. Pilgrimage to Macridge is not a ritual they take lightly. It is a convergence, rare, measured, deliberate. A moment when a company drifting in the dark turns its prow toward the light of loyalty and renews its shape. Their ships approach in silence, running cold, lights dimmed, hulls steady as glacial plates. They do not announce themselves. They arrive like a returning thought. The people of Ultramar watch with a reverence lined by caution. Novamarines are not suns returning home. They are distant stars drawing briefly nearer before resuming their lonely orbit. When they descend onto the marble plains of Macridge, their footsteps echo like judgment. Not heavy, measured, not triumphant, inevitable. They come not for blessings, not for celebration. They come to remember why they exist. Not to be heroes, not to be conquerors, but to be a line that endures, a line that absorbs, a line that prevents the return of the shadow that once strangled the Imperium. In the grand basilicas, their armor reflects the cold light of statues carved in their Primarch's image. They do not kneel, they do not prostrate, they stand upright, not out of arrogance, but alignment. For Guilliman, to them, is not a god. He is the clear thought that steadied a burning galaxy. He is the blueprint that keeps them whole even while scattered across 1,000 wars. Their reverence is quiet. Their devotion is structured. Their loyalty is a geometry rather than a flame. Before a statue, they recite no oaths. They breathe, slow, controlled, synchronized. The breath becomes prayer. The silence becomes litany. The stillness becomes the Codex itself, alive within their chests. In a sealed chamber deep beneath the fortress of Hera lies an object older than their chapter, a shard of ancient marble, etched with lines so thin they resemble fractures in bone. These lines are not decoration. They are Guilliman's first corrections, notations made during the formation of the Codex Astartes, angles of war, ratios of advance, the geometry of survival. The Novamarines come to this tablet as monks approach a relic, with silence thick enough to choke sound. They trace those lines with gauntlet fingers, not to understand them, to absorb them. This is the heart of their brotherhood with Ultramar. Not emotion, not heritage, but discipline carried from the architect to the line. Where others see art, they see law. Where others see guidance, they see prophecy. Not of victory, but of survival. And yet, the bond between them is not cold. There is affection here, buried under layers of restraint, submerged beneath centuries of duty. When they walk the training halls of Macridge, Ultramarines salute with unmistakable respect, a respect not earned by glory, but by endurance. For the Novamarines do not fall. They do not bend. They do not betray. In a galaxy of chapters fractured by pride and scarcity, they remain constant, a quiet star refusing to flicker. Even Guilliman, returned from stasis to a galaxy more fractured than he ever imagined, is said to pause at their presence. Warriors shaped not by fury, but by the purity of his intent. When his eyes fall upon their markings, the tattoos carved deep into their flesh, he does not ask their meaning. He knows. They are scripture, living geometry, the Codex etched in a muscle and memory, proof that even in the darkest frontier, his order has endured. The laurel of defiance holds special weight when brought back to Ultramar. Carried by the senior-most captain of a returning company, it is placed upon an altar of white stone and left there for a full solar cycle. It is not touched, not prayed over, not revered. It rests, a crown not of triumph, but of defiance against annihilation, against complacency, against the silence of failure that once took half the Imperium. When the Novamarines reclaim it, their formation tightens, their posture sharpens, their breath synchronizes. For the laurel is not a relic. It is a vow. A vow Ultramar depends on more than it ever admits. The northern frontier is vast. It is thin. It is scarred by wars the Imperium pretends it has forgotten. And the Novamarines are the shield placed there by Guilliman's own hand. A shield that does not rust, does not drift, does not falter. Their brotherhood with Ultramar is not declared. It is lived, in the long watches, in the cold deployments, in the silence between wars where fear grows like frost along the edge of the galaxy. When they depart Macridge, there are no feasts, no speeches, no ceremonies. Their ships rise into the sky as they came, quiet, measured, inevitable. Ultramarines watch from the ramparts with a heaviness that does not reach sorrow, but resembles the ache of seeing duty walk away again. For they know where the Novamarines go. Into the dark, into the places where the Codex thins, into wars that will never see reinforcements. Their brotherhood endures not because they remain close, but because they remain aligned. 2 chapters, 2 philosophies, 1 architect, 1 truth. Order is the wall. Discipline is the mortar. Memory is the stone, and the stone must not crack. They do not look back when they leave. They do not hesitate. They do not question. The void calls them again, a cold whisper from the edges of Imperial light. A whisper of instability, of unmeasured threats, of war yet unshaped. And they answer, not as sons returning to a father's call, but as fragments of a doctrine returning to the purpose they were made for. Their brotherhood is not warmth. It is duty, not comfort, alignment, a bond forged in the ashes of a galaxy broken once and refusing to break again. Their engines burn blue as they vanish into the dark, their hulls carrying the cold weight of Ultramar's expectations. The silence that follows is long, heavy, inevitable, a silence Guilliman himself would understand. The silence that lingers after warriors leave not because they are unwanted, but because they are needed somewhere else, somewhere farther, somewhere colder, somewhere only the disciplined dare stand. The brotherhood endures across distance, across centuries, across the void, because order endures, because remembrance endures, because the line endures. And when the stars dim, when the frontier trembles, when silence grows too deep, Ultramar knows what will return. Not angels, not heroes, but the quiet shaped into warriors, the quiet built into a wall, the quiet that holds. The Novamarines. Chapter 8. Campaigns that define them. They do not collect victories like trophies. They gather lessons like bones, arranged, cataloged, buried beneath skin. Each campaign is a scripture, each field a page, each loss a margin note that alters doctrine. To speak of their wars is not to tell stories of heroism. It is to read the accounting of endurance, to list the proofs that discipline can outlive zeal, madness, hunger, and time. Here are the campaigns that carved the Novamarines into law, not for their spectacle, not for their carnage, but for what each taught the line. Astagar, discipline defeats corruption. Astagar was not a battlefield. It was a proving ground for the idea that steadiness can unmake fanaticism. A titan of the word-bearers had turned earth into scripture, and every whisper of worship bent the land toward corruption. The world's gravity was not turned by war so much as by conviction that had become plague. The Novamarines arrived as a thin line against an avalanche of devout violence. Lesson: zealotry cracks when faced with unyielding order. They did not answer blasphemy with hate. They answered it with geometry. Their formations corrected the exaggerations of fanaticism, removing openings zeal had created. Where the enemy sought spectacle, the Novamarines offer consistency. Where the traitors shouted doctrine, the Novamarines held the line. The laurel taken from Astagar did not become a trophy. It became a reminder that measured resistance can break the spiral of devotion before it becomes a weapon. Thisala. Duty means saving what matters. Thisala was a world caught in the eddies of fate. Guilliman himself was imperiled there, and the Novamarines found themselves between a pre-March and falling order. The campaign was not the largest, but it was the most telling. When doctrine meets destiny, what is saved matters. Lesson: duty is not abstract. It is the concrete act of preserving the anchor. They did not fight to be seen. They fought to hold the axis around which other forces could realign. Their actions were quiet rescues. Corridors opened, withdrawals covered, positions solidified, each small movement a stitch in a broader tapestry that allowed the architect to continue his work. From the Sala came a truth they carved into flesh. Doctrine must sometimes shield the singular, so the whole may be rebuilt. War of the Beast, the calm in the storm. The War of the Beast was a gale of annihilation. Armies were torn, sectors bled, fortresses were rent. For many, it was a legend of desperation. For the Novamarines, it was a test of their chosen temper. Lesson: calm stabilizes catastrophe. Amid the chaos, while other chapters pursued fury or glory, the Novamarines steadied pockets of resistance. They did not solve the galaxy's hunger. They did not single-handedly turn tide. What they did was keep nodes of order intact, supply chains functional, evacuation lines open, flanks held. Their value is not measured in killed enemies, but in preserved possibilities. In a war of consumption, their restraint preserved the seeds that would later regrow the Imperium structure. Pale wasting, memory against erasure. The pale wasting was not just a war of bodies, but of minds. Warp corruption seeped into memory. Truths unraveled and histories folded over themselves. Men forgot oaths. Cities misremembered their defenses. In such a war, survival required more than steel. Lesson: memory is a weapon. Inscribe it. Wear it. Never let fade. Novamarines bore tattoos made not for pride, but for recall. Coordinates, names, patterns of formation, emergency rites, etched in his skin so that if the mind faltered, the body could still enact the doctrine. The campaign proved the necessity of living scripture, inked memory that persisted when warp-laced rot ate at recollection. They did not merely survive the pale wasting. They kept the record. They became the margin that the Imperium could consult when text itself became unreliable. Damocles and the Tyranids, the outer wall, against swarms, against hunger without thought. The Novamarines stood as the silent dam. Lesson: positional inevitability halts the devourer. When the Tyranid tides came, speed and savagery threatened to shred order. The Novamarines responded not with desperate charges, but with calculated anchors. Lines arranged like reefs, traps blended into terrain, overlapping fields of fire that funneled the swarm into kill zones. They accepted attrition as a variable and engineered survivability into the formation itself. They did not romanticize the stand. They engineered it. When worlds near Damocles buckled, the Northern Shield did not binge on heroics. It synchronized sacrifice so the enemy would bleed from design funnels rather than randomly consume the galaxy. The Tyranids taught them that inevitability can be architectural, a battlefield arranged so perfectly that even the devourer will fall in patterns predetermined by discipline. Cadian Front, the 4th Company's stand. The 4th Company's stand on the Cadian-style fronts became both a tragedy and a doctrine in anatomy. In a place where the line itself was the only thing between order and collapse, they held. Losses were absolute. Survival was partial. Yet their mechanics of defense became an educational standard. Lesson: sacrifice can be configured so meaning endures. They train not for heroics, but for transmission. ways of dying that pass doctrine to survivors. The fourth company taught that even defeat can be molded into teaching. Formations that, when breached, left survivors in positions to rebuild. Death patterns that can serve command structure even as men fell. From their ashes came methods for transmitting order through catastrophe. How to calibrate withdrawals so that the line learns instead of dissolving. Indomitus Crusade. Doctrine used as salvation. When the galaxy itself convulsed under the Indomitus Crusade scale, Novamarine doctrine became a template for stabilizing collapsing fronts. Their methods, incremental, patient, geometric, proved essential in places where command structures have been ripped and neighbors have become strangers. Lesson: doctrine can resuscitate. They did not lead charges into legends. They seeped into failing theaters and shored up command, training local defenders in the architecture of the line. They taught governors how to fail safely. They taught regiments how to die, so their memory could be used as scaffolding for future defense. The Indomitus proved that a doctrine is more than instruction. It is a form of life support for a civilization close to death. These campaigns did not gild the Novamarines in glory. They tempered their creed into something colder and more relentless. A doctrine that survived contact with the worst the galaxy could offer: heresy, hunger, memory corruption, relentless swarms, and the slow erosion of frontiers. From each field they mined a lesson and embedded it into practice. The laurel was not alone a relic. It was a syllabus. The tattoos were not vanity. They were an index. The fortress was not theater. It was a crucible. The scattering across the stars was not cowardice. It was resilience. What they learned became law. They learned how to hold without breaking, how to transmit without word, how to sacrifice without chaos, how to preserve memory when history turned traitor, how to architect defeat into education, how to be a wall so exact that the void could not find purchase. And the final lesson, the one carved deepest into marrow and armor, was simple and absolute. Humanity endures because someone holds the line. The Novamarines proved this across smoke and silence, across the devouring dark and the endless writ of memory. They did not ask to be remembered. They demanded only that the line remain. When campaigns end, the battlefield grows still. Silence returns like a verdict. A long, cold silence that weighs heavier than the guns. It is the sound of doctrine fulfilled. It is the space where nothing speaks. The Novamarines do not celebrate in that silence. They only listen. And in that listening they carve the next lesson into their flesh. Ready, inevitable, eternal. The void waits. The line holds. Silence settles like snow. When the last echo dies, history is not a song. It is a stone slab. The chapter reads it, then goes back to the line, and the silence remains. Chapter 9. The Doctrine That Outlives Men. Stillness gathers before the end. A silence fossilized by time. A hush so complete it feels older than the stars, older than the wounds that shaped the Imperium, older than the first oath ever spoken by mortal lips. In that silence, a truth waits, patient, heavy, inevitable. Men die. Doctrines endure. The Novamarines have always known this. They shape themselves around it. They carve their souls into its geometry. They move not as heroes, but as instruments of a continuity that refuses to break. When a warrior falls, the line reforms. When a captain dies, the pattern absorbs the absence. When a company vanishes into the dark, only the doctrine mourns them, quietly, without deviation. This is their immortality, not the preservation of names, but the endurance of structure. The doctrine begins with a sentence whispered in the marrow of every initiate. Humanity survives because someone holds the line, not because someone triumphs, not because someone conquers, because someone endures long enough for others to rebuild behind them. This sentence is not taught. It is lived. The Novamarines engrave it into every formation, every deployment, every retreat measure to turn collapse into a scaffolding for recovery. They are not the sword. They are the wall. A wall that does not fall because it does not permit itself to imagine falling. From a northern frontier to the most forgotten edges of Ultramar, their doctrine spreads like a lattice of frost. It slips into regiments. It reinforces worlds. It haunts the architecture of defense plans long after a Novamarine has left the field. Wherever they pass, a reliable pattern remains, a ghost of discipline, a geometry of survival, as if the void itself learned to hold the line. The tattoos carried across their skin, the lines, the coordinates, the patterns, are not marks of identity. They are scripture, a living codex, memories pressed into flesh because memory cannot be trusted, lessons etched into skin because skin survives impact when thought may not. Every warrior becomes a page of the chapter, every scar a correction, every addition a footnote, every death a closed chapter in the body of a doctrine too vast for any one life. When a Novamarine dies, another reads their flesh, not in grief, in continuity. This is how the chapter remembers without relying on flawed minds. This is how they remain coherent while scattered across the void. This is how they endure wars that erase the memories of entire sectors. Their bodies become an archive, a history not of triumphs, but of alignment. Their silence is misunderstood. It is not absence. It is pressure, a weight placed upon every thought until only the necessary remains. A stripping away of vanity, emotion, distraction. Silence, to them, is the purest expression of readiness. The battlefield is full of noise. They will not add to it. When they march, they carry the quiet of Honorum's ice. When they fight, they breathe with the rhythm of a doctrine older than their armor. When they kill, they do so without flourish, so the kill does not overshadow the formation. Their silence is not coldness. It is the discipline required to remain intact after witnessing the galaxy tear itself apart more times than history can record. To speak less is to fracture less. To fracture less is to endure. To endure is to outlive the chaos that consumes others. Thus silence becomes their shield, a silence heavier than war. Others call their doctrine rigid, static, unyielding. They are correct, and yet profoundly wrong. The doctrine does not resist change. It absorbs it, shapes it, calculates it, reinforces the line, so that when the future arrives twisted and malformed, the structure can withstand strain. The galaxy shifts constantly, warp tides rising, Xenos empires mutating, imperial borders folding like brittle paper. But the line remains, because the line adapts its tension, not its shape, its pressure, not its foundation. This is what the Imperium never understood until the wars forced them to learn. The Novamarines do not resist change. They prepare for it. Their discipline is not fossilization. It is the perpetual maintenance of the spine, a spine that refuses to bend because every vertebra has been carved from inevitability. When a battle ends, when smoke thins and the wounded whisper their final breaths, the Novamarines do not celebrate. They walk the field, not to count the fallen, but to correct the geometry of their memory. Positions are reviewed, intervals measured, angles noted, corrections etched into flesh if needed. Every battle becomes a lesson. Every lesson becomes doctrine. Every doctrine becomes another stone in the wall that outlives its makers. Victory matters less than precision. Survival matters less than alignment. The line must remain perfect, even if the warriors do not. In the far north of the Imperium, where the Astronomicon flickers like a dying lantern, the Novamarines build nothing monumental. No statues, no fortresses of pride, no shrines to heroes. They leave behind only stable formations, implicitly understood even centuries after they have vanished. a gun line preserved in old trenches, a fallback path etched into the memory of local PDF, a defensive ratio embedded in the training cycles of worlds that never saw their faces. Their doctrine spreads by imprint, like a footprint in snow that hardens into ice and becomes permanent. The Novamarines do not seek legacy. They create inevitability, a culture of order that survives long after their ships have left the sky, a geometry of defense that persists even if the chapter itself were to vanish. This is their immortality, not remembered deeds, but preserved structure. And when death finally reaches a Novamarine, whether on a silent frontier moon, whether aboard a drifting cruiser with no witnesses, whether in a war too distant for imperial record, their final act is always the same. A hand pressed to tattooed scripture, a breath measured against their last formation, a moment of stillness where the line within them settles. Not farewell, completion. Their doctrine does not die with them. It passes into the ice, into the void, into the survivors' formations, into the next pattern of war. Every death is an edit, every sacrifice a recalibration. The line becomes stronger not despite their loss, but because of it. They do not fear erasure. They fear disorder. They fear deviation. They fear failing to leave the next warrior aligned. A Novamarine's final silence is the silence of legacy fulfilled. Here lies the final truth carved into their doctrine, the truth whispered into frost and carried across the void to every company wandering the endless dark. When we fall, the line remains. When the line remains, humanity survives. When humanity survives, our silence has meaning. Meaning that outlives flesh. Meaning that outlives memory. Meaning that outlives the chapter itself, if ever the galaxy grows cold enough to forget their name. Doctrine does not crave remembrance. It craves continuity. And so the Novamarines walk the frontier not as warriors, but as archivists of survival. They ensure the Imperium's spine does not snap. They ensure the line never dissolves. They ensure the silence after battle is not the silence of extinction, but the silence of endurance. A silence shaped by discipline. A silence built into geometry. A silence heavy as the void itself. When the stars dim, when the long night creeps over the northern borders, when the galaxy trembles beneath its own hunger, the doctrine will still be there. Not in monuments, not in songs, not in memory, in the shape of the line, in the quiet, in the inevitable. The Novamarines will fade. Their names will be forgotten. Their armor will rust into dust. But the line they forged, the discipline they etched into the bones of the Imperium, will outlive them. And when the last Novamarine falls into silence, the doctrine will remain. Cold, enduring, eternal, just as the void intended.